Hello and welcome to PowerSpeaking Live. I'm Carrie Beckstrom, the host of this monthly series and the CEO of PowerSpeaking Incorporated. Today, we're going to be discussing an aspect of work that dominates a lot of our time. Meetings is the aspect I'm referring to. And we'd like to bring you, our audience, into the conversation right off the bat with two poll questions. The first question is, roughly, what percentage of your work week do you spend in meetings? Give that a thought and go ahead and respond to the question. All right, so as you can see, we've got, again, 50% being the dominant answer, followed by 60%, and then we've got a few on the lower range, between 20 and 40. All right, the second question is, what percentage of those meetings would you consider to be effective? All right, this is more of a spread. Wow. Okay, so again, the predominant answer in terms of time spent in meetings is 50%. Regarding effectiveness, our dominant answer is 40%. So a bit of a disconnect there. On the lowest end, 10%. Highest end is 80. So whoever answered that, I encourage you to contribute to this discussion because you're obviously in an environment and you may be largely responsible for it, in which a lot of that time invested is time well spent. So in general, we see a bit of a disconnect, and of equal concern is the fact that this problem has actually gotten worse over time. In the past 50 years, there's been a significant increase in the time and length of meetings to the point in which executives report that they spend up to 23 hours of their week, 58% of their week, in meetings. And many of those are ineffective. As an example, another survey that was published in the Harvard Business Review, it included surveying around 180 managers through a variety of industries, found a number of concerning results. Based on this survey, of the 180 people that were interviewed, 71% said meetings are unproductive and inefficient. So more of an issue than those that experience in our audience. 65% said meetings keep them from completing their own work. How many times have you heard someone say, I have so many meetings on my calendar today, I'm not going to be able to get any work done? 64% said meetings come at the expense of deep thinking. This one stood out to me the most. 62% said meetings miss opportunities to bring the team together. Think about that, especially in today's environment in which many of us are working remotely. Oftentimes, meetings are the few times in which you can bring people together. And we know that, at least in theory, meetings are essential to collaboration, to creativity, and innovation. Done right, they foster relationships, they result in sharing critical information, and so much more. So, our main goal today is to share a wealth of advice to ensure that you experience those benefits, not just in theory, but in practice. And again, that at least that one person who joined us, if you have some advice to share, we'd love for you to join in. And that, of course, goes to everybody. Also, anytime you have questions that you'd like our panelists to address, please put them in chat. We really want to make this interactive. So, with that, I'm going to introduce our two expert panelists with us today. First, I have the pleasure of introducing Chris Williams. Chris is the Chief Operating Officer of Interaction Associates. And in his role as COO, he's not only responsible for ensuring that he's running a smooth operation, Chris personally facilitates a number of the workshops offered through this company. And I'm so sorry, I forgot to mention, if you're not familiar with Interaction Associates, they're devoted to helping teams work better together by offering practical solutions and tools designed to enhance workplace cultures. And one of those many programs is Mastering Meetings, which Chris facilitates. I think probably one of the things Chris is most proud of is the fact that he doesn't just teach this stuff, he's a practitioner of it. And I know that to be true because Chris and I are part of the same membership organization, and we've had the benefit of participating on a number of committees together. And I've seen Chris in action. He absolutely models what it takes to run productive, engaging meetings. Welcome to the conversation, Chris.
Thank you, Kara. I'm really happy to be here today.
Also joining us is Stephanie Moore. Stephanie has been a facilitator and coach with PowerSpeaking for over 15 years, many more to come, right, Stephanie? And she is the creator and facilitator of our Achieving Meeting Excellence workshop. Stephanie also has extensive experience in leadership development, strength-based coaching and development, executive communication, presentation skills, and more. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you, Carrie.
I know that you use those same poll questions in the many, many, many Achieving Meeting Excellence workshops you've offered. Were our results in keeping with what you typically see? What do you typically see from the many organizations you work with?
No, it's interesting. Over the 10 years of doing this, we ask those same two questions in every program. And I can say that on average, people will say that they spend anywhere from 40 to 60% of their week in meetings. And then when you get to the effectiveness, it drops. It's somewhere between 30 and 50% effective. And so I always say, if you think of rounding that out, and if you spend 50% of your week in meetings and only 50% of those meetings are effective, that's a waste of time of 25% of your work week, which is more than a day. So yeah, I think it's right in line.
Yes, yes. Oh my gosh. And in this environment in which, unfortunately, a lot of people, at least in the federal government, are losing their jobs, so many people are in a position in which they're having to do more with less, as you say. So figuring out how to use this precious time more effectively is truly critical. So let's dive in. And by the way, I am going to commit the promise I made in promoting this workshop. I'm sorry, this session. Before we come to the end, I am going to share with you all the most embarrassing experience I've had leading a meeting. So stay tuned if you want to hear that story. All right, Chris, I'd love to lead off with you. Before we get into the what, let's talk about the why. Not the what, but the how. Why? What's underneath these issues? Why in so many organizations is there a disconnect between the time invested in meetings and the value that we're getting out of them?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Carrie. I would say, first of all, that the simple answer is because we have people involved and people are complex social creatures. I think the longer answer is that many of us have gone through college or university or graduate school. We've learned a lot of content. We learned a lot of technical things, but very, very few people have actually learned the art and science of what it takes to actually run and design and facilitate an effective meeting. So it's actually a deficiency in mindset, skill set, and tool set. And I like to think of meetings as almost like a microcosm of the organization. If you are in an environment where your meetings are very chaotic, or there's no focus, there's no agenda, there's no action items, which is a personal pet peeve of mine, that's probably how your organization actually shows up as being chaotic. And so meetings are a great container to build the skills of communication and collaboration and working better together effectively, because it is the container, the live container in which most people today actually are working together outside of the asynchronous email and Slack messages. But it to me, it really comes down to just this lack of process insights into what it takes. What does an effective meeting process actually look like? And what's the thought process that oftentimes we're not thinking about? We're just blindly or rotely scheduling meetings because it's so easy. You know, how many of us have been on a conversation with somebody and something comes up and the default answer is, well, let's just schedule a meeting. And I think with digital technology today, it makes it so easy. You can go into Outlook, you can go into a calendar system, you can drop an hour invite on someone's calendar in less than 5 minutes, 5 seconds. And that's what most of us experience. It's just this inundation of meetings.
Oh gosh, it's so true. You were making me think back to decades at the early start of my career, and I'm going to completely date myself. This literally is before email was a thing, and there were actually written, printed memos. So just the effort that it took to coordinate everyone's time
Right.
and convene was much more significant. So because of the work effort involved, they weren't as frequent and not as likely to be really ineffective. So it's not surprising the results I shared in terms of, in fact, I don't think I shared this stat. The average amount of time that people spent in meetings in the 1960s was 10 hours.
10 hours. Yeah. That's not surprising to me.
Yeah, 10. And I mentioned with executives, it's up to 23. And think about the cost to the business, how much that's costing to have the executives spend 23 hours of their work week that's often unproductive. So I just want to build on something you said and then get more into, so how do we fix this? It was really interesting to me, Chris, that you talked about the fact that there's really three elements involved: the mindset, the skill set, and the tool set, process obviously being a big part of it. Can you talk a little bit more about mindset? What do you mean by that?
Yeah. What I mean by mindset is like just the thinking, right? Of like, should I have a meeting? Should I, who do I involve? Who do I engage? What is my purpose of my meeting? What am I trying to achieve from an outcome perspective? A lot of times people are just like, I just want to discuss these topics, but we actually haven't done what I find really working with leaders is most people haven't done the next step, which is I have a topic, but they haven't thought about the outcome they're trying to achieve. So most meetings just become a discussion. Right. Well, any meeting, any conversation is a discussion. It's not about the discussion. It's about the output or the outcome of leaving the meeting. What do you want to actually have achieved? And what I say, you have to start with mindset because everything around meeting skills and facilitation skills, it has to begin with mindset about how are we really thinking critically about what we want to accomplish? How do we accomplish that? And who should be involved? There's a lot of stats that I've seen where, for example, 70% of employees say that their job satisfaction would be improved if they had fewer meetings. There's another stat I was reading that said upwards of 50% of employees feel like they don't have the permission and ability to decline a meeting. Like invites are being sent to them and they feel like this urge of like, well, if I don't show up, what's the perception of me as an employee? So it's a very complex problem to kind of unravel, but a lot of it, I think, really begins with that mindset.
Thank you. That really makes sense. Stephanie, would you build on that? So clearly, preparation, the time you invest before you even come together is very essential. Talk about the elements, and Chris touched on some of them that you think are so critical to consider in the preparatory stage.
If I can, I wanted to just comment on Chris's setting of the why. There was something that came to mind as you were talking, Chris. Patrick Lencioni, in one of his books, The Advantage, he had a great quote about meetings, and he said, "Bad meetings are the birthplace of unhealthy organizations, and good meetings are the origin of cohesion, clarity, and communication. There is no better way to have a fundamental impact on an organization than to change the way it does meetings." So just echoing what you said, Chris, that preparation is so important. That mindset is so important. And what I thought I would share is, by the way, I want to make a disclaimer. I don't think anything we're going to share today is earth shattering. I think it's all things we know or have experienced, whether we're in good meetings or not so good meetings. But if I had to put a core message to this, I'd say it's about turning common sense into common practice and to really believing that this is a fundamental way to really impact our organizations. So 6 things I would offer in preparation, and this isn't all inclusive, but the 6 things I think are critical to think about in that mindset. And that very first thing, Chris, that you mentioned is thinking about the purpose and the outcome of a meeting. I mean, really taking that moment to say, why are we meeting and what are we hoping to accomplish? Like, for instance, this session, Carrie, you set it up beautifully. The purpose of today is really to explore best practices on running highly effective meetings so we can maximize engagement. And the outcome is that hopefully you will all walk away with 2 to 3 key strategies for improving your meeting techniques. Something as simple as that sets the tone for why we're meeting and what we hope to accomplish. From there, think about the agenda or the topics we're going to cover as the roadmap that get us from purpose to outcome. So are those topics in order of priority to accomplish, that goal? And then for each of those topics, who's going to lead that topic? Why are they leading that topic? What are we hoping to accomplish for each of those topics? And later I'll talk about just thinking about the different outcomes for each topic. Some are just a share and a report out. Some generate conversations. Some need to lead to decisions, but being very clear about the purpose of each topic and that there is an assigned topic leader for each one, and that they're clear about the fact that they have that responsibility and they're prepared to do that. And then the timing for each of those topics. Based on that, then we take a step back and look at, do we have the right people coming to this meeting? Do they have a purpose for being there? Do they have something to contribute, a value to add? Because if they don't, then why are they being asked? And this is where we get back to the point that Chris was making, where so many people are saying, I want my time back. I go to meetings, I sit there, I contribute nothing. It was a waste of my time. So going through this process of preparation, thinking about, who do I invite? Why am I inviting? And have I communicated to them the purpose for them being there? And then the pre-read, all the materials that we should have ahead of time to be prepared coming to that meeting so that we can actively participate. We can engage in the right way. We know what's expected around the conversation that we're going to have. And then the last thing, my 6th item, is assigning people the roles of timekeeper and note taker. Because as a meeting leader, I can't do that. And if I wait until the meeting starts, we've lost that opportunity to assign it. So thinking ahead and maybe rotating that role, but that there's somebody who's helping the meeting leader facilitate and manage that meeting.
Wow. That's very, very comprehensive. Excellent. And you gave me too much credit. I did not state the purpose and the intended outcome for this discussion as comprehensively as you did. It was a little bit more general. So thank you, Stephanie. I've already identified an upgrade for myself. Everything you shared, extremely useful and essential. And I just have to underscore that preparation point, especially for individuals that require more time to process and really think through something. There's various studies have been done on the collaboration types of individuals, and some are very comfortable collaborating and innovating in the moment. Others really require a lot of time to, again, think, process in advance. That's a great way to ensure everybody is inclusive and we're hearing the best of ideas and drawing everybody out. Everything you shared, Stephanie, made me think of a post that I saw you did on LinkedIn not too long ago, Chris, and the visual I thought was just so incredibly powerful. I think it is important to acknowledge that meetings are not a one size fits all. And there's a spectrum of the types of meetings that occur in a workplace. And not every meeting requires the level of preparation that Stephanie talked about. I mean, that's essential if we're talking about high stakes meetings in which critical decisions need to be reached. But can you talk a little bit about that, Chris?
Yeah, I would say real quick that my post on LinkedIn, I had this basically spread where you can see on the far left was like an informal meeting, like a one-on-one or just kind of a check-in that a lot of leaders have with employees. And then on the far right, you'd have like a formal board meeting, right? In the middle, you have some, kind of middle spread. So there's a spectrum of like how much preparation is really required. And so I would say in my own practice, my own experience, that for an informal meeting, you might be okay with just a list of topics and the outcome of those topics. You may not have to build a formal agenda. But on the far right, where you're getting into the very formal importance territory, you absolutely need a structured agenda. And I would go far as to say that I like to tell leaders there's a 1-to-1 ratio between preparation and actual meeting time. So what do I mean by that? If you're in a 3-hour board meeting and you're the meeting leader, you should probably put 3 hours of preparation time into that 3-hour board meeting. It's a 1-to-1 ratio between duration of the meeting and preparation. And what are you doing in that preparation? You're thinking through the materials that Stephanie mentioned you want to send ahead of time. You're thinking through the process, like what conversational process am I going to use to actually achieve this outcome? Are we going to use breakout rooms? Are we going to have people contribute via chat? Are we going to have people vote on something and have to do some sort of polling that we set up in advance? You're really architecting and thinking through the interactions in advance. You're setting all that up. You're getting your scribe, you're getting your timekeeper, you're setting up your information management system, you're making the room reservations. All of that prep is essential. So that's what I mean by that kind of relationship. But it definitely spans between less formal to super formal. There's definitely a spectrum there around preparation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just build a little bit more, Chris, on the art of developing and following an agenda to ensure that you're driving the discussion to the desired outcome, but still having enough flexibility. You can't always predict how much time is needed for a particular discussion. And sometimes there's value in deviating from your agenda a little bit to go deeper on a really important point that's being surfaced.
Yeah, so I would respond in two ways. First, the agenda, and then second, more from the art of facilitation. So an agenda really is a roadmap of which you can consciously deviate. So think of it as like this is a draft roadmap of which we're going to take to achieve our outcomes, but know that we can deviate. We're not locked in necessarily to the rigid time. It's up to the group in the moment to make those conscious choices. Ideally, the meeting leader or the meeting facilitator, they're kind of working the group and making the conscious choice. So as an example, Carrie, if you and myself and Stephanie are in a meeting and we're talking about something, we have 10 minutes on the agenda, and we realize 8 minutes into the conversation, hey, we need another 10 minutes. And we feel confident that with another 10 minutes, we can really achieve that outcome. We might make a conscious choice and say, you know what, we're going to table this last topic to the next meeting. Or instead of spending 20 minutes on this last topic, we're going to cut it down to 10 minutes. And we're going to make that conscious pivot in the moment, right? And then we're going to move forward. The most important thing you can do as a meeting leader is to be very articulate about what you're doing process-wise, especially if you're in a virtual meeting. If you think about all the problems that are in meetings, you can do this exercise anywhere in the world. Ask people, what are the problems you have in meetings? People will list the same answers. It doesn't matter what country they're in or what company they work in. They say the same things. Our research shows that 90% of meeting problems are process problems. It's about lack of process or lack of process skill or lack of process dynamics or lack of process awareness. So making the process visible and letting people see, oh, we're spending 10 more minutes on this. You're kind of choreographing what you're doing. We're going to reduce this last section by 10 minutes. Instead of 20, we're going to use 10. It just helps people see what's maybe sometimes not seen.
Wonderful. Stephanie, what would you add as it relates to that critical component of time management?
I would absolutely agree. It is process. It was interesting when we were going through the design of this program. It was brought to our attention that two things that get left off of agendas are the opening and the close, like as topics. And it comes back to this process. We should always account for about 5 minutes in the opening to make sure that our agenda is still correct, that nothing has changed, priorities are still what they are, but also to talk about the process that the meeting is going to go through and how we're going to capture notes and how all of that gets clarified in that first 5 minutes. So you've established the process, you've talked about the ground rules or the expectations of participation. And then at the end, the wrap up, which is what are we doing with all of this information we've gathered and how are we going to move to action items and all of that. Those two things should be non-negotiable. We should always be doing those for exactly what Chris says, and that is establishing process.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Stephanie. When I build agendas, I always tell people 5 minutes startup, 5 minutes for close, maybe even 10 minutes close, depending on how large the meeting is. The other thing I would say would be it's really helpful when you're building an agenda to think about what is my topic? What is the outcome of that particular topic? And what's the process I'm going to use to achieve that outcome? You can do this very simple in a table. So if our topic, for example, is we need to figure out how to reduce our budget by 5%, the topic is the budget reduction. The outcome is a list of ideas on how we're going to reduce our budget by 5%. The process is what is the conversational process that I'm going to use as the meeting leader to get those ideas? If I'm in a virtual meeting with 20 participants, it's not efficient for me to have people go around and say something verbally because that's not a good use of time. I can leverage technology by saying, everybody do this pre-read, read the budget ahead of time, come in with 3 ideas, put those 3 ideas in chat or put those 3 ideas in a Google Doc that then we can then work as a group. So you're thinking through the information management and the interactive process on how you engage people. That process dimension is really, really critical.
Yeah. It's hard to understand how you got into an operational type role, Chris. You don't seem very process minded.
I actually have a book here on my desk that's all about process mapping. So that's a separate subject, but yeah.
Clearly need to drop, but thanks for great input on process. All right, awesome. Uh, so we subscribe here at Power Speaking, and this is not unique to us, about the concept, especially because we're 100% remote, about connection before content. Not always, but where you first just want to come together, that relationship component between diving right into business. What's your views on that? I'll start with you, Stephanie.
No, I think it's key. You do need to build that in. I goes back to the purpose of the meeting. If there's and to call that out, if there's a team building component to this, then make that clear that we are going to spend the first few minutes maybe having an icebreaker, question that everybody shares. And I do think because of our move to almost full virtual, we've lost that ability to connect face to face. So we're building that in is now not only a nice thing, but it's really the way in which we build community and collaboration and teams. So I do think you need to really think about how you build that in.
Yeah. 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 Thank you. Chris, I want to get to what I think are the more um, nuanced, complex parts of effectively facilitating a meeting. What's your advice for when conflict occurs during a meeting or you're navigating power dynamics where certain individuals are trying to dominate, maybe not even for the right purpose, but more to
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think about I think about conflict in 2 different buckets, right? There can be conflict over the content, like what are we talking about? Should we even talk about this topic today? And then there can be conflict over the process. How are we actually having the conversation? Who's involved? And so what I like to teach are really 2 strategies. Strategy 1 is like a preventative strategy. Strategy 2 is more of an intervention. So you can think of preventions as like going to the dentist and getting your annual cleaning every year. That's a preventative strategy. So how does that show up in a meeting? That would be something like, I might sit down with the senior executive ahead of time if I'm designing the meeting, and I might build agreement with them on the topic flow and the specific outcomes. And if there's a decision we have to make in the meeting, I might work with that leader to get very clear on the process we're going to use to take that decision and how is the decision being made. So that's a prevention because I can put a little bit of effort on the front end, and that's actually going to prevent a lot of issues downstream. I can get agreement in the first 5 minutes of the meeting on these are the topics we're going to cover and these are the outcomes. Is anyone unwilling to live with this approach and this structure? And what I can do is I can build these small agreements with people in a way it kind of locks people in and gets people's commitment piece by piece. I can get agreement on the topic. I can get agreement on role responsibility, on how much time we're going to spend. You can do this over and over. But to answer your question a little bit further, like what do you do when there's an issue in the meeting? We would call that an intervention. Like you have to get in there with a lever and you have to move somebody. You have to actually move it along. So there's all types of facilitation techniques you can do to kind of keep people. But I would say the biggest mistake I see leaders make is they shy away from conflict. Like the senior leader says something and they just like back off. Well, the impact on that is that other people see that and they're like, well, we can't, this person's really in charge. Like you lose control of the meeting. So I would say it's actually better to lean into the conflict, to work with that person and say, tell me what's happening here. Like why you seem uncomfortable having this conversation, or it seems that maybe we don't have the right people in the room. You might say what you think is happening. And the leader may say, oh no, I think we have the right people in the room. I just don't think we have the data. Right? You want to surface the real issue because then you can work that as a leader. You can say, okay, we don't have the right data. What does the rest of the group think? The rest of the group says, yeah, we don't have the right data. I don't think we can talk about that today. Okay, great. I'm going to make a proposal as the meeting leader that we're going to talk about this at a future meeting. So you want to post to them. I get a quick agreement and we can move on. So it's really about leaning into the conflict because you want to get to the root. You want to get to the root issue. The other thing I would say, this is in the stats we talked a little bit earlier, Carrie, about people declining meetings or feeling like they can't decline a meeting. I do think a lot of issues come up when people don't feel psychologically safe to communicate in a meeting. And that can come up with the power dynamic. And so as the meeting leader, I would say, if you know there's a power dynamic in place, you know that the senior leader is going to say too much or they're going to discount the ideas, you've got to think about what is the process I can design to make it psychologically safe for people. So maybe we're going to have people prep in advance and anonymously contribute ideas in a Google Doc because it's about the ideas. It's not about the author of the idea. You want to think about those dynamics in advance. So those are my take on kind of how you might handle some sort of conflict dynamic or conflict situation.
Oh, wow. Such great advice. And many times when Chris was talking, Stephanie, I was thinking about a lot of the strategies we teach in our Speaking Up workshop, which is a particularly challenging dynamic. And what we're talking about is instances in which you're leading a meeting with senior leaders. And how do you artfully navigate the discussion, address situations that may derail the meeting while being respectful of the people that you're addressing? Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Stephanie?
Well, it's funny. I was thinking exactly that. Our READ model, which is being aware when these type of dynamics are happening and being prepared to do something. And at the end of the day, it really does come down to people feeling heard, regardless whether they're a senior leader or just somebody trying to get an idea across and not feeling necessarily heard. And so as a meeting leader, those facilitation skills become critical in reflective listening, making sure you're understanding exactly what the issue might be. One other technique that I've offered in the meetings program is when you've got somebody who feels very passionate about the fact that this is not the right issue we're talking about, we should really be talking about this, and you feel like there may not be movement there, there's a technique called time boxing where you basically allow for that conversation, but you box it around an amount of time, whether you can say, this sounds like it's really important to the group that we spend a few minutes talking about this. Let's take 5 minutes and set a timer. And at the end of that time, we move back to our agenda just to allow some decompression to happen. Because if you ignore it or it's not effectively addressed, that energy and that level of frustration is going to stay high. So that's just one technique that I've offered. The other is, parking lots are very important when the decision is made by the group to not necessarily go down, but to come back and revisit. So I find that a lot of people don't use parking lots, and it's really such a key technique in meetings to make sure people feel heard and see that something's going to happen as a result of it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And there's some really simple things you can do to just make the meeting more inclusive. And one of the common ones I come across often is the person that repeats themselves over and over and over again. They keep saying the same thing. Well, why is that? They're saying that because they don't feel heard. And often they don't feel heard because they don't see their idea being captured. So I'm a huge believer in what we would teach, this concept called group memory, which is actually put the ideas out there where people can see the idea. Then you can point to the idea and say, thank you so much. We have your idea captured. You said this 3 times. Is there anything we haven't captured?
Yeah, that's
Because people want to feel heard. They want to feel heard. The other thing I would say, Stephanie, is like when you were talking about time boxing, I love that because that's like a process move of saying, hey, we're going to spend this for 5 minutes. And I would say agreements are the currency of collaboration. So if you can build the agreement, like a very small agreement with somebody, you can move them forward. So you might go to the senior leader and say something like, maybe even at a break, it sounds like you're not happy with where the agenda is going. What's something that we could do? Like get a little agreement with 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Like get a small agreement. What would it take for you to be okay with this conversation? Oh, you think we need more depth. Okay, well, what if we had trios and we did a breakout room conversation for 15 minutes and then every team had to report back to the main room? Would that meet your needs of depth of conversation? Oh, yes, it would. Okay, great. That's what we're going to do. So working with people one-on-one and building those little micro agreements is really, really a powerful technique of moving people forward.
I love that. I love agreements are the currency of collaboration. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Was there something you were going to add, Stephanie? I saw you nodding, or just
No, I was just doing that agreement. I was just thinking too, we were talking about, capturing people's ideas so that they feel heard. There was a great suggestion by one participant about, well, 2 things about parking lots is don't hold people hostage to parking lots and don't make them trash cans. And what they meant was if at the end of the meeting, you're now going to revisit the parking lot to make sure you've created a process around what we're going to do. If people aren't interested, it wasn't their issue and they don't want to stay, allow people to leave so they don't feel like they have to sit there and go through the parking lot. And the other thing is don't forget to revisit the parking lot. Otherwise, people will see it as disingenuous that you created this parking lot, but you never went back and revisited it. So just 2 things I thought. Okay.
Thank you so much. And our audience, please, if we're not hitting on some of the questions you were hoping to get answers to out of this session, please put your questions in chat. If you have any advice that we haven't shared, share that as well. I'd love to get into one more process related question, and then I'm going to do some pattern disruption and share my most embarrassing moment. Stephanie, what advice do you have for ensuring that there's a good process for capturing action items from a meeting, whether, that's through AI and or note takers, and ensuring that they're actually visibility is on them post meeting and that they're followed through on? That's a real pet peeve of mine, is all these action items are collected. You never know what were the outcomes, and they end up being revisited meeting after meeting.
Boy, that is one of my pet peeves as well. And, if you take a step back again, going back to the process, having a clear idea of what that communication strategy is going to be following the meeting. How are we going to make sure everyone is up to date on where we are. So whatever dashboards are helpful, establish those ahead of time and let people know this is how we're going to be tracking our action items. And I always like to suggest track action items in the flow of the meeting. So as your note taker is taking notes, they're also capturing the action and who's accountable, responsible, time frame if you can get it in the meeting. But that's all getting captured in the flow. And don't wait till the end of the meeting, because if your meeting runs over, that last 5 minutes goes out the window and you've lost this valuable opportunity. But I've seen people use, MS Project, Asana, dashboards on SharePoint. Figure out what your method is, but something that's visible to everyone, something that people can update in real time, is key. But establish that ahead.
Terrific, terrific. And for those that are maybe joining us just through audio, I want to share some nugget that we got through chat. We had a question. What is the author of the book that you mentioned, Chris, the process mapping book? And the author is Dan Madison. And I see that the resource has been put in chat. So for those that are interested, be sure to grab that. Thank you, Chris. All right. So here it is. My most embarrassing moment I've ever experienced leading a meeting. This goes back many, many years in my career. However, it is still and will forever remain imprinted on my mind. Many years ago, I was recently promoted to a senior leadership position, and I was just starting to forge relationships and earn the trust of my new leadership team. And I was holding an in-person strategy meeting. It was at headquarters. We were holed up in this large conference room. And about halfway through the meeting, I sensed the energy waning. And I felt like we were stuck. And right at that moment, my boss, who I was also striving to forge a relationship with and earn his trust and respect, popped in and decided to join us and just kind of observe for a while to see how things were going. So I thought, I got to do something to shift. So I stood up and I started to walk around the conference table, making eye contact with each of the members of the leadership team. And I said, it's 12 months from now. It's the end of the fiscal year. What have we accomplished? What results are we going to be able to share with the executives to prove to them that the investment in this learning organization was worthwhile? Now, being the fashionista that I am, I was donned in one of my power suits that included wide leg trousers, and I have a prop, and I still have them, even though this was many years ago. Very high-heeled patent leather green boots, as you see, with a very pointy toe. Just as I started to see the energy shift, I saw the aspirational thoughts clicking into gear. The point of my toe got caught in the cuff of my pants, and I fell flat on the floor. And I'm not talking like just kind of stumble. I'm talking one moment you see me, one moment I'm literally flat on the floor. Needless to say, I was mortified. And the members of my team were, trying to show concern and asking how I was while desperately trying not to laugh. And worse, my boss literally sat there speechless, face beet red, out of embarrassment for me. It's one thing to embarrass yourself, but for someone else to be embarrassed for you takes it to a whole new level. So I recovered. I actually laughed like uncontrollably. And we managed to get back on track. And the lesson learned for me wasn't to refrain from taking risks. It wasn't to do something unexpected when you need to shift the energy in the room. It was to never, ever pair those pointy-toed boots with wide laid packs again. That was my lesson. So it was embarrassing, what I will never forget. Now back to how-tos. I want to talk, we've provided a lot of advice on kind of individual actions, especially things that we can influence as the facilitators. Let's talk a little bit more about systemic change. Stephanie, what advice do you have for leaders who want to influence just a change in the culture, a change in how meetings are run?
I love this question because that was the catalyst that created this program. I had a senior VP come to me and say, we need to change the way we do meetings in this organization. And his point and his vision was we need to reduce time to give people time back. But he also found that he was going to too many meetings that he didn't need to be a part of. And so I think in order to create large change, especially around this topic, it's creating that clear vision of what would it look like if we just changed the way we think about meetings, that mindset, and the benefits to the organization, that amount of time that would be given back, the amount of productivity that would increase because of that. But you also have to lead by example, right? You have to be a leader. If you're going to create a vision around this, you also have to be practicing all of these techniques. And then you need to provide people with training and resources. And I will say that when we first created the program, I thought, who's going to come to a meeting to learn about meetings? And I will tell you, it was a waitlisted program for over 10 years because it was assumed that people would know how to do this. And yet I had a VP say, it's a skill like anything else. You've got to learn what the techniques are. You can confirm a lot of what you think is right about meetings and then be able to use those techniques with confidence and be able to stand up for it. To Chris's point, this same SVP said, I have mandated in my organization that if there's no agenda or objective for a meeting, you do not have to attend. That was his putting it a stake in the ground to say, we're really going to be serious about this. And people loved it. They applauded that. So we saw major parts of that organization change. And it was great.
What an effective way to drive accountability. Empowering everyone in the organization. If you're invited to a meeting and you don't know what the purpose and outcome is and there's no agenda, you don't need to go.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. Chris, by the way, we dropped in chat an overview of the workshop that Stephanie created and is delivering successfully to this day. So if you'd like to learn more, please check it out. And have we done the same for you, Chris? I can't remember if during the introduction.
No, but
Well, we'll do that. First, I'd love
we can.
just
So my comment is a couple things you can do kind of organizationally or system-wide. I think the first thing is actually conduct a meeting audit. Actually, you can do this if you're in human resources, is go out and poll like a small segment of leaders and say like, how many meetings are you in? How long are the meetings? What percent are effective? What percentage are you the meeting leader? How many meetings, what percentage have clearly defined outcomes in advance? And you can get kind of a baseline of where you are. You can do a communication audit as well. Like what systems, how are we communicating our organization? Are we an email-based company? Are we a Slack-based company? Like how are we distributing information? A lot of times people come to meetings or schedule meetings because they're trying to convey information. A lot of times you see people, let's do a status update. And it's like, that information is so easy you can do a 5-minute video, you could send it out, you could send an email, you can do it in a task management system like Asana, like you mentioned, Stephanie. There's so much better ways now with technology to get information type stuff out. My opinion is that meetings should really be reserved for real work. Like we've got to convene and make a decision. We've got to come together and generate ideas. We've got to co-create. We've got to collaborate live. A meeting should not just be primarily information push out. That's not a good use of people's time. I think more tactically, you can limit the size of meetings. There's this story back in the day with the former CEO of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, who has this 2 pizza rule where he says, no meeting can be more larger than feeding the number of people with pizzas, meaning that like the meeting has to be small enough that everybody can eat 2 pizzas. right? And what he's saying there is not just at a meeting level, that actually cascades to Amazon on a team level because it builds accountability and responsibility and ownership because you in the communication's much more fluid because you have these small kind of units. Um, but I love what you said, Stephanie, about that senior leader kind of like putting the stake in the ground and modeling the behavior. And I think we can do that as leaders. So even if you're not a senior executive in your organization, you can do something very simple, such as just asking people questions. Somebody sends you a counter invite, you could respond back and say something like, so I can best prepare for this meeting. Is there anything I should read in advance so that I can be best prepared for this meeting? What are the objectives of the meeting so that I can really think about it and bring my full self? Like just by you asking those questions, it gets somebody to elevate their mindset and the thinking skills about, should I even have a meeting and what am I really trying to do? So I would start with those. I think those are kind of pretty straightforward and tactical that works for any organization.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And we also added in chat information on Interaction Associates Mastering Meetings program. So 2 fabulous programs I encourage you to check out. Stephanie, was there something you wanted to add?
I did. I wanted to add just one other tip that I think has come up over and over again, and that is get away from the hour or 30-minute meeting. Go to 25 to 50-minute meetings, and I'll tell you why. Even because of virtual, but even before we were virtual, trying to get from another meeting is next to impossible. So that's why people don't show up on time. That's why and then there's a ripple effect. So if you can also incorporate into your preparation to either start 5 minutes after the hour and 5 minutes before the hour to give not only people physical transition time, but mental transition time. We need a buffer to be able to let go of one meeting before we enter into another mentally. So that's
Such an excellent point. Literally, we were just talking about that yesterday during a meeting with some folks on the team, that you just have to have that time to mentally shift. Super quickly, Chris, and then I want to close with each of you sharing your parting advice. You talked about mindset skills tools. We've talked about many different tools. We haven't talked a lot about AI. So obviously, AI is now being used extensively for a few different purposes in meetings. What's your advice? Where do you see AI's application being most useful?
Yeah, so my take is I've tried a lot of the AI tools. I've experimented with them as a practitioner. I'd say the AI is really, there's 2 things that AI can be useful for. One is the preparation and the thought partner side. So you can go into ChatGPT and you can have a conversation. You could say something like, I'm preparing a strategic meeting in the next month with my marketing team, and I have to come up with an agenda. Like, help me think through some creative ways or some interactive ways I can make this meeting fun, or help me think through the process of getting this topic achieved or getting this outcome achieved. And that's just a great way to generate kind of some ideas. So that prep and thought partner piece. The second piece is this new form of technology that's coming out now that's marketed as an AI meeting assistant. So you see this in Zoom. You have the Zoom AI companion. There's other tools on the market. There's like Fellow and Otter and all these other tools. They all essentially work the same. Essentially, the way it works is it's taking a recording of the meeting in real time, and it's taking an audio file of that, and it's pumping that into a chat GPT, and then it's giving you a summary output. So you can use AI as a scribe or as some sort of an assistant at the meeting, particularly if it's a complex meeting and you don't have a scribe and you're trying to keep track of a lot of things. And AI meeting assistants might be useful, but I will say, I will give a caveat and say that if the meeting is really important, if you're making specific decisions or agreements or even action items, I would highly recommend not to rely on the AI solely. Use it as an agent, use it as a support, but have a physical person scribe or take notes in the meeting. That only makes the AI output better, because if you're not precise and clear in your communication of what the action item is and who's the owner and what's the due date, the AI is not going to create that agreement solidification for you. It's only going to output the nuances of the conversation. So it's kind of like a movie trailer. You can watch a movie trailer and you can get the gist of the movie. It's not the same thing as actually being in the movie, actually seeing the film. So I recommend if you're going to use an AI meeting assistant, use it as a support tool and don't minimize or don't eliminate the actual real person scribe, because I think that's a critical piece of information management processing that people need to have.
Completely agree. We subscribe to that as well. All right, we are going to close out. Stephanie, what's your parting advice for our audience?
Be an advocate for change in the way we do meetings. And you really will, again, be a hero in your organization. Give people time back.
Wonderful. And like you said, a lot of this is common sense. Be the person that helps to put it into practice. Absolutely. Chris?
My parting advice is to put on the process goggles. So what I mean by that is take your content, step back and look at it from a process perspective and say, what's my process on prep, on running the meeting, on the setup? And that will actually really drive a lot of your effectiveness if you can come at it from a process perspective.
Terrific. Thank you both so much. This was packed with all kinds of good advice. And thank you to our audience. Thank you, Andrew, for all the wonderful resources. We are going to close by teeing up the topic for next month, which is Women's History Month. In honor of Women's History Month, we are going to be discussing how to amplify your voice, women communicating for impact. I hope you can enjoy it and join us. And thank you again, Stephanie and Chris.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.